Hey y'all, welcome to episode 9 of Colorism and Media, my fall live series. I am Dr. Sarah Webb, the founder owner of Colorism Healing. And today we are continuing that conversation about media analysis, how media can be used as both a tool for good as well as a tool for violence and oppression. And this week we're focusing specifically on media, news media, and journalism, okay? So previous episodes have included things like love scenes and how romantic interests are portrayed on TV and shaping desirability politics. I've talked about how media influences our unconscious, how it can program our subconscious minds and contribute to certain types of conditioning and patternings, right? So I highly recommend that if this is your first engagement with my content, that you go back and watch the series from the beginning. Especially, the second episode. I think that was one of my favorite episodes so far on how rhetorical violence can be deadly and how media is often used as propaganda, okay? So be sure to say hello in the chat if you're watching live, and if you're able to use the chat, let me know where you're tuning in from, what your zodiac sign is, and how you're doing, okay? Introduce yourself in the chat. I will also save time at the end for audience questions and comments that come up during the live. And yeah, so I want to share some intentions that I have with you all. I do this every episode, and they are consistent every episode. So it's not only my intentions for this series, but for other work that I do as well. And the first one is to have fun making genuine connections in real time. So because this is hard work, because it is a lot of work that requires a lot of me and other people who do it, I said recently this year, like around my birthday, that I wanted to have more fun in the work. And for me, bringing in joy, bringing in fun, bringing in opportunities for laughter and humor, my brand of humor, is what's going to help me sustain the work for another decade, right? Because this is the 10-year anniversary of Colorism Healing, and thinking about what it's taken for me to stay in this fight for 10 years and what it's going to take me to continue the fight, I definitely need to have joy in this practice. Now, my second intention is to have creative conversations that circulate ideas and probe deeper beneath the surface, okay? So again, as I say each week, we're not here to just say, oh, it's just media, oh, it's just a joke, oh, it's just entertainment, okay? We are actually here to dive deeper and see how these things are more than what they might appear to be on a surface level analysis. And then lastly, obviously, based on the name of my platform, I'm here to facilitate collective healing and transformation, okay? So if those intentions in some way resonate with you or align with your intentions and values, then welcome. I hope you can participate in today's chat. So let me see who's in the chat so far. Michael said, you already know it's not the first time I'm here. Exactly. I'm so happy to see you each week, Michael. Always participate, not just always watching, but always participating, which I really appreciate. Okay, so thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to share my throwback picture here. So this is a throwback picture to when I had my first encounter with a mainstream media platform, right? This is my first time being interviewed on the radio. I was being interviewed by Nyla Bodu, I think is her name. And it was on WBEZ, Chicago's NPR station. And the name of the segment was Suntan Skincare and Colorism. So this was like, I was so nervous. My mom and my sister were listening, right? I had never before done any media interviews. This was my first one. And so thinking about how I have contributed to mainstream media as well, because my platforms on social media are a form of media. But when we think about news and like radio and TV, like major media platforms, that was my first encounter with that. And so the little picture right there is what I looked like during that period, during 2015. And then I already showed you all this next picture of when I actually worked at a TV station. I worked at a TV news station, NBC 33, WVLA, also Fox 44 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right? So that's me there with the red shirt and the gray skirt, okay? So I've shared previously in weeks past on this series how I saw a lot of bias. I saw a lot of patterns in when we would receive police reports, right, in the email, and how they often included photographs if the suspect was black, but did not include photographs if the suspect was white, right? And so seeing how even in that short time that I worked at the TV station, how bias in narratives and propaganda could be spread even through news, even through journalism and reporting, all right? So I also want to share, let's see, hopefully my internet is okay because it's going really slow for me. How is it on y'all's end? If you can comment and let me know. Okay. So today in particular, I don't know if you all follow me on Instagram, but I posted on Instagram related to what's going on with Palestine and Israel. So I also want to be a little bit more mindful because this feels like a particularly contentious time in dialogue and discourse and in the media. So I want to be a little bit more transparent. I shared my intentions with you all. I want to go a little extra step today and share some of my values. These are on my website. Okay. So my first value is to be brave. First and foremost, I would not be anywhere talking about colorism if I did not first start with courage. Okay. The second one is to be of service. So I'm not here to toot my own horn. I'm not here to be popular. I'm not here to be famous or to look cute, even though I naturally do that, right? My ultimate goal is to help somebody, all right? My second thing is to be smart. And so I want to provide research, distilled insights. I want to do my part to have information that I share in ways that people can understand. And then this one is my favorite, is to be Sarah, okay? I intend to live and speak with integrity, honesty, sincerity, and authenticity, right? So what I do is because I want to do it, okay? And then another one that I added more recently is to be in love. Love is the source of who I am and the heart of all I do. And so everything I say in these live streams, even if it's medicine, right? Even if it is a tough pill to swallow, it is coming from that place of loving myself, loving my people, and wanting the best for all of us. And when I say I love someone, I mean I want the absolute best for their life. And I don't have to know you to want that. I don't ever have to meet you to want you to be healthy. I don't have to ever meet you. Ooh, I'm getting emotional. I don't ever have to meet you to want you to prosper and to have your needs met, okay? So let me continue. It's tough. It's tough. We're going to get through it though. And these are some things that I believe, okay? I believe, let me change the screen a little bit, that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. I believe that none of us are free unless all of us are free. I believe that maintaining any system of oppression enables all systems of oppression. I believe that in my fight to dismantle colorism specifically, which is my particular lane, my particular bag, that in order to really be committed to dismantling colorism, I have to be for dismantling all the other systems that act in concert with colorism. And I also believe that we should not think it could never be us. And I also believe that ignoring when things happen to other people increases the likelihood that it will eventually include us as well. All right? Whew. I also believe that I don't have to be vocal about every instance of oppression. I believe it's impossible or at least unsustainable for me to be vocal about every instance of oppression. I think I might not even be aware of every instance of oppression, right? And I certainly do not have to lead the charge on all issues. This speaks back to a post I made at the peak of the Stop Asian Hate, or Stop Anti-Asian Hate, rather, where there was conversations around us as Black people fighting our struggles and being expected to or being looked to speak out for all other racial and ethnic groups who were also struggling, right? And so even though I can care about multiple issues, I can't possibly lead the charge on all issues. Okay, I can care about all forms of oppression, but I cannot be organizing all the rallies for all the systems of oppression that exist, right? And then also, I think that the stakes of speaking out are not the same for all of us. And so recently, a lot of Black women and Black content creators have been talking about how people were mandating that they speak up when other people wanted them to and how other people wanted them to. And what I want people to understand is that the stakes of speaking up as a dark-skinned Black woman, for example, are not the same as speaking up as a white Jewish person, for example, especially on certain issues. And then I also want all of us to understand what our work is and to do our work, okay? It's impossible to do all the work, and so it's more effective to focus on doing your work. And I've said this for years, that my work does not have to look like your work. And vice versa, your work does not have to look like my work, okay? So those are things that I believe, and they are speaking to and influencing what I say, when I say it, how I show up, how I choose not to show up, right? And this is not for us to always be clones of each other, right? I'm not on this platform to create clones of myself, but I do like to offer frameworks, ways of thinking about things, ways of questioning and thinking critically and having analysis, okay? So with the vote on today's topic specifically, thinking about media, waiting for my slides to progress. You all, when I asked the question, do you think traditional or mainstream news and journalism does a good job covering stories that involve dark-skinned people? 81% of the 57 votes, which I think is the most amount of votes I've had on these polls so far, so thanks to those who participate. 81% said not at all, okay? 12% said it's hit or miss, and 7% says it depends on the platform, okay? Now, with this, I would like us to consider for 81% of people to say not at all. Now, this is not a nationally representative survey, but of the 57 votes, 81% said not at all. And I'm talking specifically about mainstream news and journalism. Where does that come from? Okay? What's the source of that distrust? It's based on track records. It's based on evidence of how we've seen those platforms portray us as dark-skinned people, dark-skinned Black people, right? Over time, over history. And one thing we can do is start to think about all forms of media critically. And so really, when I was sitting down to prepare for this, instead of telling you that there is one news source or one media platform that you can unequivocally trust, I feel like it's more helpful to give you an analytical tools that you can apply to all news sources, to all types of media, including this one, including mine, okay? Fact check me. Think critically about what I'm saying, right? I don't want you to just passively consume what I'm saying. And so we'll get into that a little bit here as well. Let me open the chat and see how folks are doing. Hello from Brussels. Dominique from Brussels. Michael says, you know we cute, we the finest. Miriam B says, that is exactly what I appreciate in you. Thank you, Miriam. Sending you love. Latoya says, hey. And Miriam B says, it is emotional labor. It is indeed. We focus a lot on the intellectual piece of it, or it might seem like it's primarily intellectual when I'm talking about these things, but it is very much emotional labor to do this. All right, so I wanted to speak to a comment that someone left underneath the survey, right? So this was the survey, okay? And you see here, there were 2 comments on the survey. And so here's what one of the comments said. Our story is not a value and is not their concern or agenda. It's our responsibility in our daily lives to feed our soul with how divine we are, it's a waste to look to mainstream for our worth. Create a platform that's a source of sustenance, okay? And my comment here, and I usually don't comment a lot on the survey post, but my comment here, I think, speaks to what I have been talking about this entire time, about why media matters, about why media representation matters. Again, episode 2, if you haven't seen it, on propaganda, on rhetorical violence and how it's deadly, is why these conversations are necessary, right? And so what I replied, I'll read it here, is one, I recommend watching my live on how rhetorical violence is deadly. People think discussions like this are just about our own self-esteem and how we see ourselves, but the media enables violence towards us. The media upholds police brutality against us. The media upholds narratives that directly contribute to the harm we experience across society. It's not us looking to them for validation or a sense of self-worth. And I would actually edit my comment. So I'm editing here in real time because I think, yes, part of the conversation is not seeing myself represented well in media can have a negative effect on my sense of self-worth, right? So that can definitely be a part of the conversation. But a broader impact beyond that is that we want to stop the real harm and violence that results from the narratives they tell. And so we can't just ignore what's going on in mainstream media. We can't just say, oh, well, I'm just going to go start my own platform and not care about what's happening in mainstream media, because what the narratives are, what the rhetoric is from these mainstream platforms enables violence against groups of people, enables oppression, enables atrocities, massacres, genocides, right? It enables brutality against those people. If the narrative, if the rhetoric is dehumanizing, if the rhetoric and the narrative is siding with an oppressive force, then that media representation has real world consequences, often deadly consequences. And I'm not gonna, again, I did a whole live stream talking about this. Episode 2, watch it, all right? So I wanna share, well, one more slide before I get to my analytical tools, if this progresses in time. I don't know why it's so slow. Okay, so I asked, this is part of what I posted on Instagram today. And this applies, again, regardless of the particular events that are happening, because this could have been written 20 years ago, this could be written 20 years into the future, is when we think about, especially, I'm coming from the place as a Black American, but this applies to other groups of people as well. But when I think about how the media portrayed the Ferguson protests as violent riots and how they wanted to focus on looting. Oh, look at all the Black Lives Matter protesters looting, right? Which is a false narrative. When I think about how media people describe white men who massacre people and commit mass shootings as like, oh, well, he was just having a bad day. Oh, well, he was just having a tough day. Or maybe he was struggling with his mental health, or he's just a kid, or, all the ways that they rhetorically sympathize with these white people who commit harm, red flags are going off in my mind. And thinking about how throughout my entire life, I've seen the patterns of how the media only seems to care about kidnappings when those people who are kidnapped are white. Because Black and brown girls and women have been kidnapped at high rates throughout history, happening now today, and the media ignores it. Mainstream media in particular, right? These large platforms, they continue to ignore it. There's a new series called Found featuring Shanola Hampton, who is a dark-skinned Black woman. And the very first episode talks about this very directly, about how she started her firm, her practice, to advocate for missing Black and brown people, because the media only centers and focuses and prioritizes the tragedies and the traumas of white people, right? Of people that they see themselves in. We think about the sympathy around Ukraine. And yes, Ukraine deserves compassion, sympathy. They should not be getting bombed. They should not be getting attacked. But the media's particular interest in telling their stories is coming from a place of whiteness, of prioritizing and centering whiteness in the mainstream media. Okay? And so we see if we see that in those platforms, then we should be skeptical, we should be questioning, we should be critiquing their portrayals of other events as well. We should be asking questions about how they portray other groups of people, other events, other historical narratives, right? Because we've already seen the way that they've misrepresented so many things. We can't just then wholeheartedly accept their representation of things going forward without asking significant questions, important questions. And so I'm going to offer you a few questions here that you can ask. And thank you all for tuning into this episode. I know it's different, but sometimes you have to respond to the current moment. And it's been too present in my mind. I'll also say, I'll cut this off for a second because I also want to share, again, speaking directly to, even though I can't speak up about all instances of oppression, part of what makes me particularly emotional about this one is because years ago, when I was working in high schools in Baton Rouge, I met a young Palestinian woman years before October 2023, okay? And her work, her project, her high school project, her mission, her activism out in the community was to raise awareness about the violence that Palestinians were experiencing at the hands of the Israeli army, right? And I would not have known that. It was that student, that young woman, and her activism, both on campus and off campus, that raised my awareness years ago of what innocent Palestinian women and children and people and men, civilians, were experiencing and the oppressive nature of that conflict, right? And so more recently, like maybe 2 years ago, I think, there was another outcry in favor of Palestine, right? There were bombings, again, killings, deaths, harm, violence happening to Palestinians, right? And so if you're not aware that that happened in the recent past, then again, ask yourself why the media wasn't speaking up about it back then. And I remember thinking about her when that happened, and I sent her a DM. And today, I saw how BetterHelp is offering 6 months of free counseling to people in quote unquote, in their words, people impacted by the violence against Israel, right? Or the attacks against Israel. And I'm not like in the oppression Olympics, I'm not pitting one person's harm above another person's harm. But again, it's suspicious because BetterHelp is saying, oh, we're going to offer free counseling to people impacted by this particular trauma. Meanwhile, I'm like, okay, so then when are my people going to get our reparations? When are we going to get free college? When are we going to get free therapy and counseling for life because of the generations of anti-Black violence and chattel slavery that my ancestors and the intergenerational trauma that I've experienced and received, right? Why not, right? If you're going to play the both sides argument, if you're going to play the all lives matter argument, why not also offer that free counseling to people impacted by what's happening in Gaza? The bombing of Palestinian children and Palestinian civilians, right? And so again, this collective narrative, this collective propaganda that one side is particularly victimized, whereas another is completely ignored. And so I think for years, I've known that Palestinians were fighting for their freedom. They were fighting to not be kicked out of their homes, to not be pushed off of land and experiencing other types of violence. And so because this is a reoccurring conversation in the media now, I felt, like I actually wanted to address it. And it just so happens that I was talking about news and journalism this week. I did not plan that, but since I was already going to be talking about news and journalism and the biases within that, I wanted to bring that to this conversation as well. Yeah, so Michael is saying, yep, 2 years ago we were also going hard in these social media streets. Yeah, because Palestinians were reporting atrocities that were being inflicted upon them by the Israeli state. And so to see, Anderson Cooper interviewing the family of kidnapped Israeli people, when it's like, okay, but can we also, where were all the interviews of the family members of the kidnapped and murdered and raped Palestinian people for the past 70 plus years, right? And so it's just suspicious. Again, it's suspicious for me coming from coming from a country that refuses to apologize for slavery, much less, correct it. And I also ask, if the United States is so concerned about anti-Semitism, why haven't they eradicated the Ku Klux Klan? Why haven't they eradicated the KKK? If the United States is so concerned about the loss of innocent civilian lives, why haven't they abolished the police who repeatedly kill innocent civilians, right? And so again, I'm not saying that one side is always, or one type of media is always wrong, right? There's reporting that can come from these sources that might actually be accurate. There are narratives and perspectives that might come from mainstream media that might be informative, that might be helpful. But for me as a Black person to just wholeheartedly, unquestioningly accept the perspective and the lens of these mainstream platforms is unwise. It's unwise. And so let me share some questions that we could be asking ourselves, regardless of what we're watching, regardless of the source, whether it's a newspaper, a radio program, a podcast, a YouTube broadcast, or, MSNBC. One, if this group of people were blank, would the rhetoric be different? Ask yourself that question. If this group of people were light-skinned, were men, were cisgendered, were American, were white, would the rhetoric be different? How would the narrative change for someone with a different racial identity? How would the narrative or the rhetoric be different for someone with a different skin tone or hair texture, right? Would these people be seen as vigilantes or violent looters? And you've seen it. I know you've seen it. I know the people watching will see how white people trying to survive are just that, white people trying to survive. But the minute a Black person is trying to survive, oh, they're looting. They're being destructive. They're stealing, right? And so the same behavior, if it's a white person doing it, oh, they're scavenging for food. They're trying to survive. A Black person does the same thing, i.e. Hurricane Katrina, right? And it's like, oh, these people are committing a crime. They're stealing. Y'all have seen it. I know y'all have seen it. It happens every day in the reporting, in the journalism, okay? Also, diversify your media sources. It can't just all be TV news. It can't just all be the New York Times. It can't just all be social media. It can't just all be NPR, right? And so think about, not only are like the actual news sources diverse, but are the journalists themselves diverse? Am I listening to journalists of different racial and ethnic backgrounds? Am I listening to journalists with different identities from different countries and different nationalities? Thirdly, apply historical context. I was going to talk about Nat Turner's revolt and how it was described in the papers at the time as, violent massacres, vigilantes. And thinking about how people who would spin history, right, to say like, oh, Nat Turner was killing women and children who were asleep in their beds, right? And saying yes. And so that should justify white people massacring all African Americans, right? Like, I know the people watching this would think, that's not exactly what happened, right? And so even if you don't condone what Nat Turner did, if you understand the historical context of what Nat Turner did, you would not see it as justification then for the continued enslavement and violence towards African American people, right? And so historical context is important. And you don't have to know the historical context of every racial and ethnic group to the level of expertise. But if you know European history, if you know American history, you already have enough historical context to understand why something like Nat Turner's revolt happened in the first place, okay? A fourth thing is to stop looking for unbiased news. Just stop expecting stuff to be unbiased. Because, again, previous episodes, even if someone consciously doesn't want to be biased, there's a strong likelihood that they might have an unconscious bias, a subconscious bias that they can't even see. So even if people with the best intentions, are still susceptible to being biased, myself included. And so instead of looking for that one platform that's always unbiased, is to start asking yourself, what is their bias? And I'll be transparent, I am biased in favor of historically oppressed groups. I have a bias in favor of historically oppressed groups, which is why on my platform, even though light-skinned people might experience bullying, right? I hear light-skinned people all the time talking about why I got chased after school, they pulled my hair, they rejected me, they tried to beat me up in the bathroom. I don't condone that, but I'm not giving space to that on my platform because I'm biased in favor of historically oppressed groups. So I want you to know that. That's my transparency in this moment, knowing that you can choose to continue to watch my content or not. And the same with race. I don't think we should be killing white people, but I'm also not going to center the stories of white people if I'm talking about racism. I, Sarah, Colorism Healing, this platform is biased in favor of historically oppressed groups, okay? So if I'm having a conversation about racism, I'm not really interested in inviting white people to that table, to that conversation, right? To talk about like, oh, well, I experienced classism, or to tell their side of why they think they can't be racist, or how they are the children of immigrants who had to work hard, right? Because they escaped the potato famine in Ireland, right? Like I have compassion for those things, but I'm not centering that on this platform. So yes, this is a biased platform. Okay, you are well informed now. And there are probably other biases I'm not able to name that I have. And I would ask you to point them out if you see them, okay? And then lastly, at what point does not taking sides actually mean that you've taken a side? So folks, the default side is the oppressive one. You cannot be neutral in a system of oppression, okay? So if you are trying to be neutral, just know that the default side is the oppressive one, okay? And so when a news outlet or a journalist or a media platform is trying to say like, oh, well, we're unbiased and we're gonna share all sides of the story with equal weight. If you're watching a tug of war competition and one side on the rope has 100 people on the right side of the rope and the other side of the rope has 10 people, and you're like, well, I'm not going to take sides. I'm just going to, give equal effort to both sides. You have essentially staked the side with 100 people as the winner, okay? And so when we're talking about oppression, which is what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about individual instances of being mean to someone or individual instances of bullying someone. I'm not talking about individual interpersonal rejection or this individual person didn't want to be my friend because of my looks, right? I'm talking about systemic oppression, colorism being one form of systemic oppression. And so I'm not going to give equal weight to quote unquote both sides of that conversation. Because to do so is to implicitly support the oppressive side. Okay? Woo. I feel like I might get in trouble for saying some of the things I said. But again, going back to my earlier values, be brave and be Sarah. So I found the courage to say a lot of what I said today, and it's truly, genuinely where I'm at. Okay, a year from now, I could be in a completely different state of mind. I don't know. But today, everything I've said is authentically how I feel, how I think, how I operate. And I am really trying to be transparent about that, okay? So let's get into your reflection question. Is there a better way to gather information about X? Let me close this, right? And so as you are consuming media, as you are consuming news, as you're reading articles, reading blog posts, listening to podcasts, right? Whether people consider themselves professional journalists or just people like me who have commentary on things, ask yourself, is there a better way to gather information about X? And I'll give you a very like basic example. If we are talking about racism and your source of information is a white person, there might be a better way to gather information about racism, okay? If we're talking about colorism, which we are, always talking about colorism over here, if we're talking about colorism and you're only listening to light-skinned people or you're only listening to biracial people, there might be a better way to gather information about that topic. If we're talking about abortion, if we're talking about women's rights, and your only source of information is coming from men, cis men in particular, there might be a better source of information than that, right? Like there might be a better way to go about gathering information on this topic. So ask yourself that question. An opportunity for growth here is as you consume information about current events, try to discern the lens and the slant being used. And so again, because any media platform, any news outlet is susceptible at some point to being biased, to being unfair, to having the facts wrong, to misreading the situation, to putting their own their own stuff into the conversation. Like anybody can do that. I am susceptible of doing that. You are susceptible of doing that. Fox News is susceptible of doing that, right? Like any platform is not above the need to check themselves and to be observed and critiqued. And so rather than saying, oh, never watch CNN again, okay? You got to choose the sources for yourself. Rather than saying, oh, never listen to that podcast again, or never watch TV again, or never turn on the radio again. Because any platform could potentially be wrong, are biased, are misinformed, are just not really doing the work of standing up against oppression. It's actually better, like I was saying, to always always be alert to where someone is being biased and how they're being biased. And to ask yourself, what is this slant and why are they taking that particular slant? How are they framing this situation? How are they framing this event? And who does that benefit? Who benefits from framing the Ferguson protests as riots and looting? Who benefits from framing Black children as adults, adultifying Black children? Who benefits from that, right? Who benefits from framing this narrative or this current situation through this particular lens, okay? And then your affirmation, before I get into comments or questions, I want to know the truth even if it's uncomfortable. I'm just going to leave it at that. I love y'all so much. And this was hard for me. This was difficult for me, but it felt like I just felt really, really compelled to go there today. So that's that. Thank y'all for being here. Hey, Carolyn from London. Marion B says, I do not blame you for your bias. I am light-skinned and I understand the necessity to center the most oppressed. Marion B says, white people teaching about racism and getting paid for it, it is a killer for me for sure. Yeah. All right. So now I don't see any other questions or comments coming through. Thank you all to everyone who tuned in, whether you're watching the live or the replay. I think this is a conversation that is far reaching beyond any one particular group of people. It's far reaching beyond any one particular set of current events. Every day of every year, regardless of what's happening in the news cycle, we have to be critical consumers of the news. We have to know that any journalist is susceptible to being biased, to having biases, whether it be conscious biases or unconscious biases. And as I said in episode 2, I'm not going to stop telling y'all to go watch it. We have to be honest that the media, the newspapers, the TV news, the radio news, even more than just being biased, oftentimes have been explicitly used as propaganda to justify the dehumanization, violence, and oppression of entire groups of people. That's what my whole episode 2 was about. How the media, even beyond just like, oh, I just had an unconscious bias, or oh, I just was ignorant about this history. Too often, y'all, too often, media has been leveraged as a tool in efforts to disenfranchise people, to commit atrocities against people as propaganda. So never forget that. Yes, we would hope for humanity that it's more often just an unconscious bias. We would hope that. But as history has shown us time and time again, it's often more insidious than just, oh, my lack of awareness, or I just had an unconscious bias that I wasn't aware of and I didn't, account for. All right. Let me go. Thank y'all. I really, really thank y'all. And again, if you're just tuning in and you didn't see the beginning, I encourage you to go back to the beginning because I genuinely love y'all, okay? I don't have to know you to love you based on how I define love, based on how I understand love. I want you, whoever's listening or watching, I want you to be healthy. I want you to be free. I want you to have your humanity recognized, okay, and treated as such. Love y'all.